Alright, everybody. So, if you've been watching me lately, you'll know that I've been spending a lot of time at the range lately shooting some guns. Something I enjoy a lot. It's a fun sport. It is just a nice pastime, and, improving your accuracy at it is always fun. Going to the range with friends and shooting together is always fun. It's just a good pastime. I'm an American, there are guns here, and it is enjoyable. I don't own any guns yet, though that's going to change quite soon. It's just a whole, you have to have certain, bills in the state in order to get your gun registration in said state, and I just moved here. So I have to be here longer before I can buy a gun here. That said, though, I've been doing a lot of stuff about guns lately. And because of that, and notably because I'm American, and many of you might be aware of this statistic, but I believe there are 14 guns for every person in America. To every human being, there's 14 guns. Is that not correct? Do I have that stat right, chat? I mean, it's a statistical thing. Not every person has 14 guns. But yeah, in total numbers, guns outnumber people in this country 14-1 is my understanding. So, with that in mind, and with many of my audience being American, I feel doing a gun safety segment is worth doing. And what kind of spurred this was a joke thread that I saw on Twitter that ended up getting a bunch of non-joke responses. And a lot of these responses I'm pretty certain are not jokes. And it's those people that this segment is for. Especially if they're fucking European. Anyway, this all started when a friend of mine named Eofi, I think that's how you pronounce it, Eofi? That's how I'd pronounce it. Eofi B said, "I'm pro-gun now exclusively because they're really hot and I want to get railed with one to my head." It is a joke, let's remember though. Just want him to put one, and then Merrick replies, "Just want him to put one in my mouth and make me say please around it while I stare into his eyes." Vosh replies, "What the fuck is wrong with women?" And they go on to reply, I'm sure jokingly, that they are into gunplay, right? Now, they said that they're joking, and I'm going to believe that they are joking, but there are a lot of people in the replies that were not joking. This is based, I agree. It is not based at all. So, obviously the joking is fine, but when it comes to actual gun kink play, I think that gun kink play is completely unethical. I do. I genuinely think gun kink play is, actually unethical. I think asking to do it with your partner is, a pretty terrible thing to do. And I think if your partner chooses to do it, that is also a terrible, thing to do. I don't think Merrick was joking. She's claimed she was joking. Unloaded, right? Well, I will say, one of the posts that was really big in the replies to this tweet thread was a Reddit post. A screenshot of a Reddit post from a guy telling, asking a Reddit, community if he was a pussy because he refuses to have sex with his girlfriend with his Glock to her head, loaded with the safety off as she asked. And it's he's always been taught the rules of firearm safety, and he was like, no, and she called him a pussy. And it's ooh, yeah, no, you don't want to be with someone like that, So, we're going to talk about gun safety. And we're going to talk about how in America, gun safety is part of our culture to a degree that is almost a religious ceremony of sorts, if that makes sense. Allow me to explain. Even before I'd shot a gun in my life, my parents told me, the rules of gun safety. My uncles who shot a lot of guns told me the rules of gun safety and everything, and I was, very much taught and had drilled into me the fact that there are 3 very, very important things you must always remember. Every gun ought to be treated like it's loaded. You need to always know where your gun is pointed and never point it at anything that you don't intend to destroy. And you need to be knowledgeable of what your target is and what is behind your target. There are more rules of gun safety that are worth memorizing, but those are the big 3. And something that I've noticed that a lot of people who are either not very familiar with guns or particularly non-Americans, like, how they will get with guns is the idea that, like, as long as you are totally sure the gun can't fire, it's fine to point the gun at people. I have had people who aren't American flag me at the range and be like, well, the gun's not loaded. It's like, doesn't matter. You know, like, it doesn't matter that it's not loaded. You flagged me, you know? You can't do that. You got to be careful. You always got to know where it's pointing, you know? Like, that's happened before. And I've seen lots of videos of particularly non-Americans who just kind of forget that very fundamental rule of when you are holding a gun, you never point it at a person you don't intend to kill. And this isn't just because of practicality. Obviously, pointing a gun capable of firing, and, you know, maybe you make a mistake and it could still fire even if you totally know it can't, at a person is dangerous. But there are also just general habits and, like, basic shows of respect that you give firearms and ways that you just don't treat them. And one of the ways that you don't treat a firearm is pointing it at somebody that you don't intend to kill. Even if you remove the firing pin, it's totally unloaded, it literally cannot fire. If it is a real firearm, you do not want to be making a habit of pointing it at people. There's an argument to be made that, like, an airsoft gun could be used to do it ethically, but even then, I would be concerned about basically normalizing gunplay to the extent of, like, maybe we should try it with a real gun now, you know? But hopefully that doesn't end up being the outcome of people who decide to go with the airsoft method. I'd rather use an airsoft gun than an actual gun. Regardless, though, I understand that for a lot of people who are watching, the idea that, like, there are circumstances in which it is there's no circumstance in which it's okay to point a firearm at a real firearm at somebody who you don't intend to shoot. The idea of just never doing that and that being like a sort of just rule of having guns in America. If you flag people, everyone's going to be like, get the fuck out of here. Get out of here. Get out. I don't care if it's unloaded. I don't care if the firing pin's out. Get the fuck out of here. It's just something that is so ingrained that a habit you should never break. And the idea of doing it, even in a case where there's no chance of it firing and you've checked and you know, breaking that habit for the sake of kink play, it feels like it's on par with using, like, it's worse, I'd say, than using zip ties as like restraints in BDSM. In like BDSM kink. It's dangerous. Now, obviously, I don't know if Aofi was joking, but I'm pretty sure Merrick said she was joking, but like a lot of people in the replies, particularly women, who most likely aren't... Merrick, I know, is familiar with guns, and she knows not to, like, point guns at people you don't intend to kill. She was joking. She's owned guns. She said she was joking. I believe her. But there were a lot of people in the replies, particularly women, who chances are haven't shot guns before. Many of them probably even Europeans that are, like, super into the gun like, kink stuff. And it's like, if it's a fantasy, that's fine. But if it's something you actually have intent to seek out a guy who will do that with you, or you're going to shame a guy who refuses to do it with you, then, like, we're entering territory where it's like, alright, this is a problem. Now, to give you guys an idea, 9mm can still have a bullet in the chamber. Very good thing to bring up, by the way, J-Man G. Well, I mean, a lot of guns can still have a bullet in the chamber. Most guns, you can take a magazine out and still have a round in the chamber without knowing if you don't clear it. But, like, very good point, though. It's good that you brought that up, because that actually works as a perfect segue into the next part of this video. We're going to move on from the kink shaming now to the genuine gun safety. Now, I watch a lot of firearms content on YouTube, and believe it or not, I actually enjoy watching firearms safety content, because one of my favorite sayings when I talk about going to the range and shooting guns is shooting guns is fun. But shooting guns stops being fun very fast if you're not doing it safely. So, safety and fun go hand in hand when shooting guns. That's my saying. So, we're going to go ahead and learn about some gun safety. This is a video that I've watched myself in my free time. It's also a video I've shown some friends that I intend to teach how to shoot prior to, like, actually, like, teaching them, because I want them to know, like, basic fundamental stuff. One thing I want to make a habit of doing is to have a chamber flag in for all photo ops to be double safe. Well, you don't have to use a chamber flag. You can just use, like, a spent casing to keep the slide, like, pulled back, or to keep the, keep it from going into battery. Like, you just use, like, a spent casing, just stick it in there and it won't shut. Just wedge it. That's what, you can just do that, yeah. Related but random, Xanderhall, what is your opinion on Stoger pistols? What is a Stoger pistol? It's got the plasticky, bottom and the stainless steel top. I mean, it looks nice. Is that a double trigger? What is that trigger? Hold on. Wait a minute. Hold on. What is that trigger? Huh. Oh, so you can do light... Okay, that's really cool. So you can do, like, the very light, like, trigger squeeze. Just a very light squeeze. Or you can have it so you can have to do, like, a much harder, heavier pullback. Okay. So you can set it to 2 different modes. Okay, that's really neat. It's in the trigger. I'm pretty sure that's what that's for. That's interesting. Wow, I haven't seen this one before. That's a cool-looking handgun. Show us? Yeah, sure. This is it. There's like a little mini trigger on here. It's a trigger safety. Ah, okay. I haven't shot any handguns that have a trigger safety. Shame it from a safety perspective. Using a real gun takes things from kinky to suicidally dangerous. Yeah, don't use guns in kink, please. Use an airsoft gun, okay? Actually, no. Don't use an airsoft gun. Don't use an airsoft gun. Use a gel pellet gun. Yeah, Glocks have a trigger safety. A lot of people don't even think Glocks have a safety because of that. But yeah, or, I mean, a Nerf gun would also work, but, like, they have little gel pellet guns. Like, the ones where you literally put those little Orby gel pellets into, like, a little thing, and then you just stick it in and pull it back, and it literally shoots Orbeez that just, like, pop on your skin. Use one of those, even. Because even that, you can't even load airsoft BBs into that. Like, I don't even think you should be breaking the habit of, like, not holding gun-like things to people's heads or whatever, but, like, just eliminate the danger factor, at least, you know? Like, if you're gonna do it, then eliminate the danger factor. But that aside, moving on from the cringe, Stogers are near clones of Glocks. It does look a lot like a Glock. It's got the plastic bottom and the stainless steel top like a Glock. Yeah, so, as I was saying, we're gonna move on from the, I haven't shot a Glock, by the way. I want to. I would love to shoot a Glock. But I want to move on from the, like, the kink shaming to the actual gun safety, okay? There's a lot of Glock clones. Of course they are. It's one of the most famous handguns in, like, all of gun manufacturing history. Yeah. With that said, we're going to learn today from a video that I've watched in my own personal time. We're going to learn about negligent discharge. Something relevant to the Alec Baldwin Rust case as well. There was a negligent discharge on the set of a movie Alec Baldwin was filming where he shot somebody on set. It was a negligent discharge. A lot of movies will use real guns for certain scenes. It does sound dirty. There is a double entendre there, yes. And the guy in the video even acknowledges it. But, what was I saying? Yeah. They use real guns oftentimes on movies, in movies for, like, certain scenes, but then in other scenes, they can't have someone pointing a real gun at somebody in a scene, so they use a prop gun, right? Because even in movies, even when they have people whose job it is to clear the guns and check and make sure they aren't, 1, real, and 2, that they're empty, even then, they don't point real guns at each other in movies. The actors don't point real guns at each other even when they have an entire team of people to check the gun and make sure it's either 1 fake or empty. They don't point real guns at each other. In that case, they thought it was a prop gun, and it wasn't. There was a mistake on set. With that said, we're going to learn about negligent discharges, things that can cause them. For the gun lovers in chat, you are going to just kind of roll your eyes at most of these because it's going to be like, yeah, no fucking shit at pretty much all of these. But for a lot of you in chat, I think it's valuable that you learn this. And frankly, nobody is too experienced with guns to be reminded of the fundamentals, right? You know? Like just, hey, by the way, remember this. This is a good video.
Hi, we're out on the range today, so please bear with gunfire you hear in the background, although fair warning, just about all I'm going to do today is talk. And what I'm talking about are the most common types of and most common causes of negligent discharges. Now, this has to be prefaced with three things. First, the recognition of the obvious double entendre of the term negligent discharge. So, everybody get your jokes out of the way. Ha ha ha. Secondly, I have to point out that I do not have any statistics.
Yeah. His finger was on the trigger, wasn't it, circa 111? He pulled back the slide and his finger was on the trigger. He didn't have a straight trigger finger, did he? Because that's exactly one of the things he uses as an example in this video. Yep. Yep, very common when people pull back the slide in 1911 for their finger to be on the trigger, and they have light trigger pull. I've shot a 1911 before. That trigger pull is not very heavy. So it is possible for you to pull back that slide and it pulls forward, it shoots forward, and there's a little momentum, and your finger gives just enough weight on that trigger. Boom. You shot a hole in the floor. Yeah. You got to be careful. And you always need to keep a straight trigger finger. The most common type of negligent discharge are ones caused by people having their finger on the trigger when they shouldn't have had their finger on the trigger.
In front of me, I'm just going off what I have observed on the range or in the field over the years. And if I did have statistics in front of me, I would consider them virtually useless because when someone has a negligent discharge, they very frequently lie about the conditions under which it occurred. Oh wait, more double entendre. He said discharge. Third, we have to ask the question, what's the difference between an accidental discharge and a negligent discharge? Well, different people would define it differently. The way I'm going to define it here today is that an accidental discharge is when your firearm goes off when you didn't want it to. A negligent discharge is when your firearm goes off when you didn't want it to because of something you did wrong. Let me see if I can illustrate that point. Now, here's a Colt government model. And the way some 1911 platforms are constructed...
We're starting right away with the example that happened to
pull your
circa
slide back to chamber around, and then
111.
let that slide go forward. There is a chance, albeit a slight one, but a chance that that gun will just go off. Now, if that happens when you had it pointed in a safe direction at a time in a place where...
I don't think in that scenario... I think in the scenario that happened to your uncle's friend... I think your uncle's friend's finger was on the trigger. I don't think it was just a, like, that 1 in a million chance the 1911 goes off when you let that slide go. That's really rare. But also, you shouldn't be doing that with the 1911, which is notorious for this. I think a fair amount of people that are into guns know this. So I assume your uncle would have. Why would he pull back the slide of a loaded 1911 in the house where he literally couldn't point it in a safe direction? He should have cleared it. Like, he could have just ejected the magazine and then pulled back the slide to clear the round in the chamber, and it would have been completely safe. He could have showed it off, and it would have been the safest way to do that. But instead, I guess he just did something stupid. Yeah. He should have taken the magazine out first.
Where it was okay for the gun to go off, then you haven't done anything wrong. That was an accidental discharge. What makes it a negligent discharge is when you put your magazine in, pull your slide back, and you have negligently left your finger in the trigger guard, and then you let that go, and it chambers around, and sometimes that inertia will pull the gun forward onto your finger, and it goes off. That's a negligent discharge because you negligently had your finger where it shouldn't be. So now that we've seen the difference, let's get started on what I would consider to be the most common types and causes of negligent discharges. When a negligent discharge occurs, it's sometimes because one thing went wrong, but far more often there were several factors involved, several things that had to be in place before the negligent discharge occurred. This Colt government model can help me illustrate that point. Let's take a close-up look at it. A very common factor in negligent discharges is failure to properly engage a manual safety. The way 1911 platforms are intended to be carried is you put a magazine in, put a round in the chamber, now the hammer is cocked and the safety is disengaged. You then engage the safety and put the pistol in the proper holster. But when you have a negligent discharge, it's often a combination of...
Who in chat carries a 1911 half-cocked? Who in chat? Does anybody carry a 1911, and do they carry it half-cocked? Because this part... I do? Okay, this part will be relevant to you.
Factors working together that cause that
Good
discharge.
Luck.
For example, if I fail to engage
You're gambling
my
every
safety,
time.
That handgun is not going to go off unless I add the failure of putting my...
It's safer, arguably, for carrying, but you need skill to put it into the half-cock position. Like, the way you do it is you have to slowly pull back the trigger while maintaining your thumb on the hammer, slowly lowering it down into the half-cock position. And you have to let your finger off the trigger just at the right time as well, because if your finger's still on the trigger and you let go of the hammer, bang. That's where people fuck up. Some people even put their finger in the way of the hammer to try to, like, make it not fall down if they mess up. But even that isn't guaranteed, and it's not necessary if you do it right. But it's something you don't want to mess up, you know? Isn't it like that? Isn't it just like that, like a revolver, though? It's like a revolver, yeah. The 1911 is pretty similar to a revolver in that sense. It's an older handgun. It's been around for a while.
My finger on the trigger when I shouldn't have, and we see the failure of the safety and the failure of the finger result in a negligent discharge. So commonly we have multiple factors working together to result in a negligent discharge. Another factor that's common in negligent discharges is failure to properly manipulate an exposed hammer. On a gun like the 1911, you put in a magazine of ammunition, put a round in the chamber, hammer is cocked, safety is disengaged, you then engage the safety and put it in the proper holster. Some people do not feel comfortable about having a cocked autoloader in their holster, so they will disengage the safety and then lower the hammer to the half-cock position. Now, when I do that, I make that look fairly easy.
So here's how you do it.
That's the result of a great deal of practice. But what I'm doing is I have to, when the hammer is cocked, push it down to disengage the grip safety, pull the trigger and hold it until I let the hammer forward just a little bit, then take my finger off the trigger and lower the hammer to half-cock. Failure to do this in the right sequence, in the right way, can result in my thumb slipping off the hammer and the firearm discharging negligently. Failure to properly manipulate an exposed hammer.
It's not hard, but it's one of those things where if you fuck up, well... You just fired the gun, so you better have been pointing it in a safe direction. So it's not that it's hard. It's that it's punishing if you fail, you know? It's less so difficulty and more so punishing failure.
Is a big factor in negligent discharges. So how do we correct problems with manual safety and trigger finger management? First, diligent training, making sure you know when your safety is disengaged and when it's engaged, and training yourself to have a straight trigger finger.
I grew up in the South. Having a straight trigger finger and not pointing the gun at anybody is not... it's not anything, if you grew up in the South, you're likely to have a problem with. That shit's ingrained in you.
Now, as far as managing the lowering of the hammer...
It's part of your fucking soul.
Diligent training. But there's other safety factors you can put in place. When I want to lower this hammer, I can take the thumb of my non-firing hand and put it in the way so that as I'm lowering the hammer, if the thumb of my firing hand falls off of the hammer, the thumb of my non-firing hand will keep the gun from discharging. Now, recently a viewer contacted me, and if I understand correctly what he wrote, what he was doing was using the thumb of his non-firing hand, putting it in the way of the hammer, and then just pulling the trigger, allowing the hammer to fall onto his non-firing thumb. Until his thumb slipped out of the way, the gun went off and he had a negligent discharge. Putting something blocking the hammer should be in addition to lowering the hammer with your thumb of your firing hand, not instead of. I mentioned carrying the 1911 in the proper holster. In this case, that's not only one that holds the handgun securely, but one that prevents the manual safety from becoming disengaged. And that brings me to my next point. A major causative factor in negligent discharges is carrying a handgun in the wrong holster. I could go on about holsters all day, but in the interest...
This less so applies to me. I haven't carried guns in holsters before, but I'm sure we've got some people who carry in here. Obviously, I've got people in chat who are knowledgeable on guns, so statistically, some of you in chat probably carry, some of you probably conceal carry. Pretty based if you conceal carry, especially in times like this. So yeah, this might be relevant to you if you use a holster.
In the interest of brevity, I'm just going to use this one to illustrate my point. This is a hunter holster. They come in a wide variety to accommodate a wide variety of handguns. They're of outstanding quality, and they have a feature that I really like. This is made to slide onto your belt, but if you carry a lot of equipment on your belt, instead of having to take all that equipment off so you can slide this on...
Shoot that squirrel. I see a few pixels moving. That's a fucking squirrel. He doesn't see it. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. You can't hunt at a live fire range. Now, he's at a range. He can't hunt the squirrel. But no, if he was just out in the middle of the woods, it'd be like, ah, shit. Bro. There's a squirrel behind you, man. Shoot it.
You unsnap this, and you can just put this over the belt. You can also use that to take it off the belt. And it's
in the state of Florida, you can't have guns and a medical marijuana card. Do you guys know that? If you get a medical marijuana card in the state of Florida, you can't have guns, I'm pretty sure. It's pretty fucked.
A very useful feature. However, some of the older ones that are made to carry revolvers have the retention strap over the trigger guard instead of over the hammer. And what can happen is that when you're going through thick brush, or just when you get out of the car and this brushes against the bottom of your steering wheel, you end up with a cocked revolver in your holster, and that is not something you want. Then when you add to that the other causative factor of putting your finger on the trigger when you shouldn't, you end up with a negligent discharge. Now, if you have one of these old design holsters, there's a couple of things you can do. First, you can quit using it. Or second, you can detach this and then reattach it up here so it will go over the hammer. I have not modified this one because in this configuration it allows me to illustrate my point, and because I typically use it to carry my Smith & Wesson Model 638. With the shrouded hammer, I don't need anything over the hammer. And with the retention strap over the trigger guard, it's in the perfect position to allow me to get the revolver into action quickly. Now, there's another type of negligent discharge I want to demonstrate, and this is one...
I don't have much to say there because I don't carry it in a holster, so just not really applicable to any gun carrying that I do.
Particular to revolvers. So today, with more people carrying autoloaders, you don't see it as often. It's also something that occurs far more often in the field than it does on the range. And when I demonstrate this, you might think that this is something that would rarely, if ever, occur, but I'm telling you, I have seen this occur several times. And the particulars and the details of how it happens can vary, but basically it's something like this. You're in the field and you're plinking pop cans or you're doing handgun hunting, and oh, there goes a rabbit. Nope, didn't get him. Where'd he go? Oh, he stopped. I'm going to cock the hammer for a more precise... Oh, he ran again. You already know what's coming. Oh, there he stopped. Oh, he ran again. There he goes.
That's two. That's two. Two left.
Wait a minute, I didn't think I was empty. I don't know, I didn't think I shot 6, but I got a couple of clicks. It's obviously empty. I mean, I pulled the trigger. Whoa, how did that happen? It had already clicked a couple of times. I mean, I thought it was empty. All I did was pull the trigger. Oh, how did that happen? Now, before you send me any nasty grams, we're on a live fire range and people monitor what's going on. But what happened was, when I cocked the hammer and then didn't fire and lowered it, I rotated that live round out of firing position. And so even though I got a couple of clicks and it seemed like the revolver was empty, it wasn't. This also occurs when someone partially loads a revolver and then they forget which direction the cylinder rotates and they think they're rotating a live round out of firing position when they're rotating it into firing position.
This guy is funny.
And for as quirky as this seems, I have seen it occur several times. What this also illustrates is that one of the causes of a negligent discharge is a negligent discharge. Someone will have a negligent discharge and it rattles them. And then while
we've seen this happen on video, I've covered this. If someone wants to dig up the video, I'd really appreciate it. It was the video where it's like in someone's living room and some kids are like on the couch and a gunshot goes off because I guess there was a gun in the couch cushions, and then the dad, I guess, like runs to grab the gun and it fires when he goes to grab it. Like, a lot of the time, a negligent discharge rattles everybody, and it makes you less precise and less careful when you're handling firearms, and that can lead to further, mistreating of the guns. Yeah, if anyone could find that one as, like, a very good demonstration of this, I think that would be good.
While they're rattled, they'll negligently pull the trigger again. That can occur with revolvers, but that type of negligent discharge occurs far more often with autoloaders. And speaking of autoloaders, let me show you another type of negligent discharge. Now, I want to demonstrate something that is a very common occurrence in negligent discharges.
We got the cock.
This will also demonstrate that chain of events that typically occurs before your negligent discharge occurs. And what I'm talking about is you have an auto-loading firearm, you put a magazine in that firearm, put a round in the chamber. Now, you intended to put a round in the chamber, you know there's a round in the chamber, you're fine, and then comes the time when you unload the firearm. And you take your magazine out, and you forget to take the round out of the chamber. So, you forgot to take the round out of the chamber, and then you neglected to check the chamber, ensuring that the firearm was clear, and then you pulled the trigger when you shouldn't have. And you end up with a negligent discharge. And this shows us that chain of events. Now,
the next one he also demonstrates is also a rookie mistake, and that's clearing the chamber before taking the magazine out, and then thinking you've got a clear gun. No, there's another one left in the chamber, buddy. You just chambered another one as soon as you cleared the first one.
Now, another thing that's very common is you load your auto-loading firearm. You know that it's loaded, you intended for it to be loaded, and then when it comes time to unload, you remember to take the round out of the chamber, but you get the sequence in the wrong order. So, you take the round out of the chamber, inadvertently, just chambering another round, then take the magazine out, then declare your firearm to be empty. When you've gotten the sequence out of order, neglected to check the chamber and make sure the firearm was empty, and pulled the trigger when you shouldn't have. And you get another negligent discharge. Now, I wouldn't say in every single negligent discharge, but I would say in the overwhelming majority of them, one of the factors is having your finger in the trigger guard when you shouldn't have. Second only to that, the major causative factor in negligent discharges is when you have a round in the chamber when you thought that the chamber was empty. And whether it's an auto-loading pistol, auto-loading rifle, pump shotgun, lever-action rifle, whatever, thinking your chamber is empty when there's actually a round in the chamber is one of the biggest factors in negligent discharges. Now, let me show you another way that you end up with a round in the chamber when you thought it was empty. Now let me see if I can illustrate some of the ways that you can get a round in the chamber when you didn't really intend to. When I was in the military, there were many occasions when we were not authorized to have loaded firearms, but we had magazines in a mag pouch. There were also times when we were authorized to have a magazine in the rifle, but not a round in the chamber. Now, let me tell you an anecdote. We leave the bivouac area and we go get on the truck to go out to our guard post. And at the time we had M4s, not A1s, but the point remains the same. When everybody gets on the truck, they put a magazine in their rifle, no round in the chamber. When we come back from our guard shift, we have to be unloaded to go into the bivouac area, and it's my job to make sure everybody's rifle's unloaded. So everyone takes out their magazine and then shows me they have an empty chamber. Except one of the troops walks up to me, pulls his charging handle to the rear, shows me his chamber's empty, and then chambers around because he neglected to take his magazine out, and we had to correct the situation. This can also happen with handguns, authorized to have a magazine in, not authorized to have a round in the chamber. Pull the slide back, make sure there's no round in the chamber, and then chamber around. This really doesn't happen all that often with an M9 or a 92 FS because with its wide open system, when you pull the slide back, you can very easily see the rounds in there.
Some people don't look.
But it can happen with other types of firearms. Pump shotguns are notorious for someone pulling the slide back, seeing the chambers empty, and then not looking while they chamber a live round. This also brings me to the point of loaded chamber indicators. Right now there's a round in this chamber, and the loaded chamber indicator is indicating that there is. And when I want a round in the chamber, I will trust that loaded chamber indicator to tell me that there is. But when it's time to have the handgun unloaded, I do not trust that indicator, which is right now indicating an empty chamber, to be correct.
He doesn't show it very well.
I will always visually
I think he overestimated the quality of his camera.
Chamber. So the takeaways from all of this. Well, when you have a negligent discharge, not always but most of the time, there are several factors in play, and today we went over what I consider to be the most common ones. Improper management of mechanical safety, improper management of an exposed hammer, failing to understand cylinder rotation, using the wrong holster, and the two big ones, having a round in the chamber when you thought the chamber was empty, and having your finger on the trigger when you shouldn't have. So if you have any stories you'd like to share about negligent discharges, I'd like to hear about them. And as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching the Negligent Discharges video.
Very good video. One of my favorites on YouTube in regards to covering this topic because he does such a good job of just straightforwardly explaining the mechanics of said firearms and how these problems occur. Understanding how guns work is one of the best ways to just, you know, be safe with them and, you know, reduce the likelihood of someone getting hurt or firing the gun when you don't mean to and maybe doing some damage to things you didn't want to do damage to. And at the end of the day, the reason why I showed this is to sort of exemplify for people how in-depth and how, you know, much detail and how much thought is put into, particularly in American gun culture, at least within responsible American gun culture. And I think most gun owners in America are responsible gun owners. If they weren't, there'd be a lot more carnage on the news, okay? Like, it's part of our culture. Like, it's part of American culture in regards to guns, is gun safety. And I think that's a good thing. I think there's a lot of things wrong with American gun culture, but the fact that gun safety is a big part of it, I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think it's important to remember that, I mean, hell, like, even knowing all of these things and being careful, if you use a real gun for some, like, kink roleplay stuff, I mean, hell, there was somebody in chat who mentioned a story and reminded me about it. There were two guys that were buddies, and one of them had just bought a gun, and he was showing it off to his friend in, I believe it was like either a car or a truck. They were in a vehicle, and his buddy was like, hey, make sure it's not loaded. And the guy who had bought the gun was like, oh, yeah, it's not loaded, pointed the gun at his friend's head and pulled the trigger, no doubt expecting it just to click and for his friend to freak out and be like, yo, what the f***, man? And be like, ah, you flinched, you flinched. Nope. Bang. He thought the chamber was empty. It was not. Shot his friend point blank range in the head. Killed him right there. Tried to do a prank. Thought it was safe. He was so sure the gun was empty and it was safe to pull the prank. But it wasn't. These rules exist for a reason. Very good reason. The vast majority of deaths and injuries in this country caused by firearms are from misconduct with them. Gunplay is firearm misconduct. Do not use real firearms if you're going to do gunplay and that's something you're into, for God's sakes. And do not pressure a partner into doing it. If you're into it and you find out your partner has a gun, do not pressure them into using their gun for gunplay. And if you have a gun and you're into it, do not pressure your partner into doing it as well. To either party trying to initiate that, I don't think it's good. Xanderhall, a good saying is that safety rules are written in blood. That is a very good saying. Thank you, Uncle Dingler. I've never heard that before. Gun safety rules are written in blood. That's a very good way to word it. Thank you. I actually really appreciate that.